Wait, is this one of those things I have to ask Scott about?
It's not our job to explain that. It's totally up to Scott.
It was your parents' job or your friends when you were in elementary school?
I was left out of a lot of loops.
Welcome back to another episode of 1980s Now, a weekly examination of the importance of 1980s pop culture and its influence today. Hey guys, my name's Will, and joining me as always are my friends and co-hosts Kat and John. Hey guys.
Guys.
Hey, happy to see you as always.
Don't forget, in addition to his co-hosting duties here, John also hosts his own podcast, Gen X Grown Up.
Thank you.
Hey, I am really excited about today's show because we're going to talk about, we're going to do 1980s news in just a moment here, but a little bit later on, you're going to hear our chat with singer, songwriter, composer, producer, original founding member of Information Society, Paul Robb. I am a big fan of Information Society. I have been way back since, I want to say 85 or 86 when Running came out, and nobody knew who they were. But because I was a DJ at the time, I'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay, before that, we'll review current news stories related to, I don't have any clever puns, but I know what we're going to talk about. We're going to review current news stories related to 1980s media, including a backstory for a secondary Aliens character, a rock legend gets the Barbie treatment, and Prince's picks that are now Prince's picks that became Prince's picks that became Prince are now worth a mint.
No. Do you know what Prince's prick is?
Prince's prick? Did I say Prince's prick?
That prick was in there.
Okay, you worked it right
Prince's
in there.
Picks that became Prince are now worth a mint. All right, anyway, back to the show. Okay. All right, hey, a couple of announcements. This Tuesday, October 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern, join us on Facebook Live for 1980s trivia. I feel like that's all I should say. I feel like we'll scare people away if we say we're going to do more than that.
Oh, no.
Yes, do that. And I'll say this. Well, John will be there. All three of us will be there.
Yeah, John will be there,
and at least one of us will be in costume for sure, I could say. Because one I trust, I know that when they say they're going to do something, they do it.
And that's Kat.
And the other two of us may chicken out or whatever. So, yeah. So, hey, one of us will be in costume. So join us on Facebook Live on Tuesday, October 25th at 7 p.m. for 1980s trivia. Someone's going to walk away with a $50 e-gift card.
Yes.
Not just someone, the person who knows the most. I mean, right?
Yeah.
That's good. Can it be me? Can I win? Am I eligible?
Person.
Okay. And the other thing I was going to say is we're going to actually do our live podcast leading up to the trivia. I mean, should we say that? I mean, people are going to get scared away now. No, you want the $50?
No.
You sit through the podcast.
They love us, right? They love listening to us. They're going to stick around.
Yeah, okay. they'll be there. Who would want to miss it? Yeah. You want to see all the amazing live news before you get a chance to win 50 simoleons.
Yeah. That's right.
I'm going to be there just because I want to see how Kat dresses up.
How do you know it's going to be me?
We know.
Another announcement. Hey, remember just a few months ago, I made a new friend and someone who I long admired, Lori Miller. I spoke to her just a few months ago. She is an original founding member of the group Expose. Look, you should just listen to the interview because we covered so much ground and learned so much about sort of the real story about what happened at the beginnings of this group that ultimately went on to find such great success. But Lori was there at the ground floor, helped get the record deal, and so on and so forth. Anyway, listen to our interview. And actually in that interview also, she teased this, which is now come to be. After Expose in 1986, she had recorded some solo tracks. And one of them, without her even knowing it, in the last several years, became very popular among club DJs. I'm talking about right now.
Wow,
I think in particular overseas. Okay. So much so that a record label that's got some offices, including one out of Amsterdam, approached her and said, hey, can we reissue this on vinyl again?
Oh, cool.
Because DJs can't find it. Apparently it's, the original ones were selling for so much money because there's, just limited pressings of it back from in the 1980s. And I believe, again, listen to the interview. She found the original physical tape of it, the masters, which they used to then reissue a vinyl pressing of her song, Love is a Natural Magical Thing. And so you can get yours right now. I've already ordered mine.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
And I'm probably going to butcher the names of this record company here. It looks like, look, they do have an office in Italy. So maybe it is like Hisaji Records.
Okay.
I'm going to say. But I actually ordered my copy through rubadub.co.uk, which is the distributor of the record as well. We'll put the links in the description down below. You can get your hands on your own. I can't wait to get mine. Another vinyl.
So what are you going to do with your copy of this new vinyl? You're going to get back into DJing? You're going to do some cross mixing and some scratching and some wiggy. What you got?
Absolutely.
Wiggy,
all
wiggy.
those things, John. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to frame it in here, I think. I don't know if I'll open it. Maybe. I'm going to frame it, mount it, I think.
Nice. I have a new record.
Get that out of here. Put that down. You see all that stuff all the time. Is that new?
Well, yeah, it came in the mail.
Oh, is that from the care package?
Yeah.
Oh, this is from John.
This is from John.
He's continuing to feed your addiction.
Oh, yeah.
I was trying to get her off the sauce, John.
Were you? It wasn't working.
Got her back.
Look at this. Look at this.
Oh my God. More stuff. More stuff that no one can see except for me and John. On our audio
Well, when it makes the
podcast.
YouTube video, now there's a reason to go and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can see all the
there you
cool
go.
stuff
Yeah.
Kat got.
It said, for those of you who can't see, it says the official lyric book, the complete words to all their songs. Although that's not exactly true
At the time,
because this is from back in the 80s. They have a lot more songs since then. But as you know, it has the first two albums for sure.
But not something you had before, right? New in
It
your
is
collection?
not something
Awesome.
I had before, and it's amazing, and it has cool extra stuff in it.
So now it's a Duran Duran show again.
But I could turn it into something else.
Get that out of here.
Kat, quit speaking to your passions. That's not what this show is for. This is a showcase for Will.
I'm cutting this all out of the show. No one's ever going to know what any of this is. I'm going to put the video up. You're going to be pixelated. Whatever. Now I sound like a big asshole again. I'm just going to take all this out.
It's so easy to goad him into defensiveness.
Okay, but
we love you, Will.
after the news, but before Paul, we're going to pick a winner for the Ralph Macchio book contest. If you didn't catch it on Facebook, we had announced Ralph Macchio. We had invited Ralph Macchio to do a Facebook Live interview like we do with so many of our favorites from the 1980s. He couldn't make it. He's busy promoting his book. But he did send us a book, his new book, Waxing On, The Karate Kid and Me, to give away.
Well, that and a little thing called Cobra Kai. But yes, promoting the book. That's what he's busy
Oh,
doing.
yes, Cobra Kai. As if
He might be
needs
doing
promotion.
some of that. Yeah.
Hey,
Maybe.
With that said, let's get caught up on 1980s news. This week in 1980s news, as originally reported by Entertainment Weekly, Aliens Vasquez to reveal backstory of beloved Alien franchise character. You guys fans of the Aliens film, the sequel to Alien?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Of course.
I'm not even sure that I saw the first one, but I know I saw the second
Oh, yeah?
one. Yeah.
It's kind of a Terminator situation. Like the second one was kind of better and more successful, but the first one also, like Terminator, was amazing in its own right, just a lower budget thing. But yeah, love it.
Yeah, and way to go James Cameron for doing that twice.
No kidding, right?
And with Aliens, it wasn't even his property originally. Like, Terminator was his brainchild from the beginning. This, he jumped in on something that was originally created by Ridley Scott, of all people. I mean, it's like,
Right.
you could want to follow that. But anyway, few people have stood up against the xenomorphs in the Alien franchise, but I want to say few people have stood against the aliens and survived. I mean, there's very few that have survived. I'd count them on one hand. But Alien's character, Private Vasquez, is definitely one who stood up against the xenomorphs and definitely one who didn't survive.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, shit, yeah. So Private Vasquez, the fictional Latina member of the U.S. Colonial Marine Corps in the 1986 hit sci-fi sequel, Aliens, is getting a backstory in a new novel. The backstory of the character, who was played by Jeanette Goldstein in James Cameron's film. First thing that leaps to mind, right? Jeanette Goldstein.
Right?
Private Vasquez.
Latina.
Will be detailed in a new book titled Aliens Vasquez and written by Violet Castro. It's coming out on October 25th. It's set to explore the canonical background of the character as well as the story of the children she was forced to leave behind even before the doomed mission to Hadley's Hope. Private Vasquez had to fight to survive.
If you're a fan of the Alien franchise, you didn't get to learn a lot about Vasquez. I mean, she made her presence well known on screen. She was a badass and she was a warrior and she was amazing. But she was kind of, I won't say she was a pawn, she was a bishop in this large chess game of aliens. She wasn't the lead character and he's a robot. I know Bishop.
Okay, there you go. It's like, if you were going to pick any piece, don't pick Bishop.
Don't pick Bishop. Okay,
Right,
Bishop is
right.
the bishop. Vasquez is the knight. We'll say that. The rook.
Oh,
One of
there
those.
you go.
A different one that's not Bishop.
But not the king or
point.
queen.
No.
Because that's like Hicks and...
We know who the
that's
queen
the real
is.
queen, the alien queen. And the king is Ripley.
They're both queens. It's a queen fight.
They're both queens. Yeah.
Yaz queen. So, this just raises the question for me. Look, does anyone really care?
Isn't this kind of one of those expansion of a property thing that I know John is in favor of?
Like one of those parallel, tangential sort of.
Yeah. It's like we're finding out, we're going to find out what were they, valets were doing with Ferris, with the car and Ferris Bueller.
Right. And Ferris Bueller.
I feel like this could be cool.
Even more than that, though, I think if you're an Alien fan, it's interesting to learn about Vasquez because she had such a great on-screen presence.
Yeah.
But, I even think about, as an entitled white male, I think about people like Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, who played on there. And Vasquez was one of those things where here's a strong Latina woman that you don't see on the screen a lot. So I imagine for young women who related to her, it's amazing to have not a non-obvious character who you can relate to and see on screen doing, like obvious or stereotypical Latin jobs, doing a space marine, badass. Yeah. Having explored that character, I think, is even more important for people who relate to her directly than probably your generic Alien fan.
Yeah,
agreed.
For those reasons, yes, I agree it's important. I guess my question about does anybody care, that's sort of a... Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is by asking that, I don't mean to discount.
Certainly. Oh, no, not at all.
I get all that. And I get it for lots of reasons, and not the least of which is I see in my daughters them seeing female characters represented.
Yeah.
And saying, wow. I mean, seriously, it seems like it's out of those videos we've seen where my youngest daughter, especially when she was younger, would say things like, and we were a very, open-minded, liberal home. Her to say to us, wow, girls could do that too? It's like, well, where did you get the idea they couldn't?
That they couldn't. It's embedded.
It just seeps in through indoctrination in society. Yeah. So that's why it's important to have those off the map role models that don't fit in that mold. Yeah. It's cool.
So in that sense, absolutely 100% important. Would I read it? Probably not. But if you made one about Bishop, I'm not reading that either,
Right. Yep.
And the author agrees with you and cites that sort of as her inspiration, John. Castro, again, who wrote this new novel, is a Mexican-American from San Antonio. She said that she pitched the idea for the book after thinking about the big influence the character had in such a small role. Quote, it was one of the few depictions that kind of broke the mold of a domestic worker, farm worker, or gangbanger.
There you go. Right. Yeah.
I saw her and I was like, wow, look at this brown woman. She has a bandana and she's unapologetic about who she is. And if you remember, I think in the film, she says she was in a gang or a gangbang or something like that, I think. But obviously, and according to what they tease about the book, her family's military background inspires her to travel to space.
The cool thing about the character is that in true egalitarian character design, her heritage had zero to do with her characterization in the film. It just happened to be where she came from, and she's an equal badass with the other soldiers. That's why, and she was a super badass, by the way.
Yes. She has that great line too in Aliens, which is, I can't remember what the character says to her. Hey, Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No, have you?
Yes.
With regard to Goldstein being cast as a Latina character, in 2016, she said, at the time they were looking for an actress who was big and muscular, and they were wanting to cast a bodybuilder because they didn't think there were any actresses who had, a physique that they wanted. She said, she goes on to say, you know what? I tell you the truth. I've never been cast or given the opportunity to audition for a short, freckle-faced Jewish girl who is half Russian and half Moroccan and Brazilian. So I don't think I would work very much at all if that's all I was able to read for.
Right. Good for her.
So, and if you remember, Goldstein appears in a number of different James Cameron films. The one that stands out to me, speaking of Terminator films, she's in Terminator 2. She plays the stepmother of John.
Oh, damn. That's right. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I did not make that connection until this very instant.
A very different looking and acting character. She's in Titanic also, I believe, although I can't remember what she did in that.
Well, she's in the Cameron Repertory Theater, isn't she?
Yeah, I was going to say, James Cameron really likes casting her.
Yeah.
Hey, in other 1980s news, per Variety, Tina Turner gets the Barbie treatment. Did you play with Barbies, Kat, when you were... Oh, I'm sorry. After we just did that segment, John or Kat, either of you play with Barbies?
I have purchased at least one Barbie because I purchased the Ken and Barbie Star Trek set that came out in the mid-90s. Because they were in Star Trek uniforms, and I thought that was cool, and I invested, and then the bottom fell out, and I sold them for peanuts. But other than that, no, I haven't collected
and you haven't
Barbies.
played with them?
I guess not. No, I mean, action figures, sure, but not Barbies per se.
Sure, yeah.
And now I'm going to cut off Kat as she talks to really just lean into the misogyny of our show. Anyway, so the Tina Turner...
Let me explain it to you, Kat.
I have something to say here.
Just trying to do the opposite of what we were just talking about. Was just
I know.
our kumbaya moment. All right.
I never know with you.
You don't? You don't know if I was really going to let you talk?
No, that's not true.
She was sure you weren't.
I was actually more of an action figure girl.
Okay.
But Barbies were part of something that was around. Mm-hmm. But I liked cutting their hair. I liked modifying them for some reason. And so they didn't ever, stay in the same form that they started in.
You say it didn't ever grow back.
No. I'm sure that started at an age where I just assumed it might.
Did you learn consequences as a result of this?
It definitely cause and effect and consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So I did play with them, but it wasn't in a imaginary play kind of way. It was like, okay, what can I do with this kind of way? Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, okay. Well, what was the news story about?
Tina Turner Barbie.
Yeah, Tina Turner Barbie doll, part of the toy company's music series, features the Grammy-winning and chart-topping singer in the outfit she wore in the iconic music video for What's Love Got to Do With It? And of course, this is tied to the song's 40th anniversary. And if you see the doll, you recognize the outfit right away.
Yeah, yeah. And the hair, the frosted tips, I saw the picture. It's just what you expect. Something else that caught my ear, though, that you said, Will, it's part of a series of musical artists.
That's right.
What else has been out that I missed? Are there other
yes.
Barbie musicians that I need?
There's been a number of musicians immortalized in this doll form, including David Bowie, Gloria Estefan, Elton John.
Really?
There's at least,
my goodness.
6 or so others.
I haven't been following this.
I didn't know they did that.
No, I didn't.
I do the novelty thing, like I said, because I got the Goofy Star Trek one that time, but I wasn't aware they have done other. I guess makes sense. It's like Funko Pops, right? It's like, what else can we turn this into? And that's what they're doing.
And I don't know that I've ever seen any of these in the store. I do see some of those novelty dolls, and some of them have attracted the attention of my daughter, my youngest, but not these. But as we mentioned, she's got the iconic outfit on, the black mini dress, denim jacket, sheer black tights, and black heels. As John mentioned, the most notable part of the doll, though, is her volumized and textured hair, which she rocked throughout the 1980s. Speaking about that, the designer Bill Greenig said, "We used a lot of screen grabs to see the hair at all angles. Lots of teasing and hairspray was involved." Couldn't have been involved in the final product, though. I mean, is there someone really on the assembly line?
I'm sure that was true for Tina, though.
That made right. That made me curious. I'm thinking, is there hairspray? Is there Aquanet on this doll?
Yeah,
it's an accessory. It comes packed in.
It's flammable.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, it's definitely Tina Turner-esque, but it needs a little more. There was a certain little waviness or kinkiness in her hair that I'd like to see. But also her face isn't quite she needs more prominent cheekbones. It doesn't.
The hair and outfit do it more than the actual mold of the doll. You're right. I thought the same thing when I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like if you saw the doll without the clothing or the hair, you wouldn't go, aha, Tina Turner,
I
right?
wouldn't
Necessarily.
at all.
You need the whole package.
You think they were just taking another mold and just making it look more like her, painting it differently?
It must be.
I hope so. I hope that wasn't their final solution for Tina Turner, building from scratch. So I'm thinking they probably repurposed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly hope not. And also, I mean, the thing about Tina Turner that was one of the things that was unique about her is that she was older during the time that she was popular, right? In the 80s. Yeah. And the doll, she could be a 20-year-old.
It's a Barbie doll, right? It has doll, Barbie proportions. It looks, waifishly thin and the 3 clicks for the knees kind of thing. It's going to be, a standard mold.
The track which this doll celebrates was the singer's first and only #1 single. on the
Which
Billboard
is so
100.
weird.
Really?
When it was released in 1984.
Huh.
Of course, Turner took home 3 awards for the song at the 1985 Grammy Awards.
It's so hard to believe it's her only number one, though. I feel like there had to have been something else.
I was going to say maybe more surprising is the fact that although she was inducted into the Rock Hall of Fame with Ike Turner as a duo in 1991, she was only inducted as a solo artist last year.
A chill just ran up my back. I was afraid it was going to be time to play. How many number one hits? I'm like, oh no! Whew, dodged
That's
a
why I
bullet.
had to tell John earlier there's not going to be any games.
I was wondering, too.
Because Cat would win. It's music trivia, but
Oh, no.
that sounds like a great game, actually, that I don't want to lose at, but I would play.
If you want to get the doll, too bad, you're too late.
What?
It was released on October 13th,
Oh,
but when many fans rushed to buy the $55 doll online,
wow.
it had reportedly sold out in just a day.
Seriously?
Wow. That's going to be 100 plus on eBay.
And I've got to tell you, so I went to see about buying one myself,
Uh-huh.
and a link for the doll on Walmart came up. So, to verify whether it was sold out, I clicked on the link, and it is out of stock at Walmart. And the description of the Barbie doll for Tina Turner is Barbie's signature Tina Turner doll in 90s fashion.
What?
Welcome to Walmart.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, in other 1980s news, last week the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about an Andy Warhol illustration of Prince, the purple one, which was based on a photograph by photographer Lynn Goldsmith. So the story goes, in 1981, Goldsmith, whose work as a rock and roll photographer included portraits of Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, Bruce Springsteen, and a number of different other now music legends, was assigned to shoot photos of Prince for Newsweek. The portraits ultimately were not published, but she kept them in her files. And 3 years later, so again, this is in the 1980s, after Purple Rain was released in 1984, Variety Fair wanted an image of Prince to accompany an article that they were doing on him called Purple Fame. It was to be about his mega stardom. So they commissioned Warhol to do an illustration. For $400, the magazine licensed Goldsmith's portrait of Prince as a quote artist reference, and they agreed to credit her with the source photograph for the illustration. Warhol, as you know, he took other images and Warholized them. That was his whole thing, right? So he took this photo and created a Prince series, 14 silkscreen prints, 2 pencil drawings. One of the prints, quote Purple Prince, was published alongside the article in Vanity Fair.
Okay.
That's without controversy. But when Prince died in 2016, Condé Nast wanted an image of him for the cover of a single-issue commemorative magazine called The Genius of Prince. So you've seen these at supermarkets usually right after somebody dies. They had this thing ready to go.
Yes.
If someone's already written it, they're waiting for all these people to keel over.
They've got the death file. That's at every television station or radio station. They're like, every celebrity, we're ready when they go. Yeah.
Wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
So for the cover of their magazine, they approached the Andy Warhol Foundation now, which now holds the artist's copyright. And for $10,000, they licensed a different print from that series, the quote orange Prince. Remember purple print, what was it called? Purple Prince? The Purple Prince.
It was a one-eyed, one-horn flying purple prince.
I should have put Purple Prince in my teas earlier. The Purple Prince Purple Prince picks. All right, whatever. Anyway, so they pay $10,000 for the orange Prince this time. But this time the image is published without any credit or payment to Goldsmith, who sees it for the first time on a magazine cover, recognizes that her work claims copyright infringement. So the Warhol Foundation preemptively sues Goldsmith. They know she's going to probably sue them, and they just really what happened. This is am I going to? If I'm getting too,
they sue her first?
Yes,
preemptively. Wait, what?
Yeah. So again, if I'm
What
getting
sense
too,
does that
what's the
make?
word when you're esoteric? If this is too esoteric, then just stop me. But this is a concept in the law where you've got a legal matter out there that's controversial in the sense, not controversial in the sense that it's titillating or, but controversial in the sense that it's unsettled,
right?
And that's a liability for you. You can sue the person who you think might sue you just to get a judgment.
Okay,
A
that's
declaratory judgment.
wow. What?
So you go to the court and say, "Look, I know this is a problem. Just rule on it, so I can sleep at night."
Okay.
That's basically what it is. Right?
All right.
So I know I'm not going to get sued. I know.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's what they did, and this went through first it went through the lower courts. eventually reaching the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, who ruled in 2019 in favor of Andy Warhol.
Okay.
And then last year, the appellate court, which hears appeals and is typically the last word in most of these cases, reversed that decision. So now they're siding with the photographer. Of course, look, now Andy Warhol's not satisfied with that. So now it made it all its way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, like I mentioned, just heard oral arguments on this last week.
We don't know yet.
Here's the arguments. In short, no, we don't know. We won't know for some time.
Okay.
As it usually works, the Supreme Court hears all these different cases, and then they go in secret and lately really fuck things up for everybody, and then let everybody know how they made these crazy ass decisions that are not actually based in law. Well, anyway, that's just my little editorial. But anyway, so they heard the oral arguments, and here's the two sides. Andy Warhol says it's fair use. Kat, you'll remember we talked to Professor KJ Green about copyright issues, including fair use, many episodes ago. But they're arguing it was fair use because it was, quote, transformative.
That makes me think of Weird Al, too. Remember when we talked about Weird Al? Yeah. Like the parody being, it's creating, turning it into a whole different thing, a whole new entity.
Kat, that's perfect that you bring that up, because the last time the Supreme Court substantially addressed fair use was in the similar context. It was the Two Live Crew case where they were getting sued by Roy Orbison or Acuff Rose Music about Two Live Crew's parody of "Oh Pretty Woman."
Okay.
It was a 1989 song.
Yeah.
Which was based on Roy Orbison's rock ballad. And what they did was they just took the song and changed the words pretty much. And that's the case that ultimately decided, no, parody can be fair use. There used to be this idea that if you have a parody, but you try to, or if you do something that otherwise would be fair use, but you try to make money off of it, it can't be fair use.
Okay.
The court said, no, you can make money off of things that are fair use. And this is and there's other reasons why this is still
if it's fair, it's fair. I mean, make up your mind. It's fair, but kind of not. Well,
they're never going to make up their mind.
I know.
But and it was deemed a parody because the court said, well, look, they're kind of making a social commentary on this concept of pretty woman by having this other perspective of a different type of character than the one Roy Orbison was, embodying in his version of the song. But this is a really scary case because, and again, is this going on for too long? Should we just cut this whole story out?
I think it's interesting. You can decide what to cut.
John will decide. So there's that one idea of a parody, right? And a parody being a way of transforming something. So now we get to this idea of something that, whether it's transformative or not, because that's another way that maybe something is safe, is if you transform it enough. Warhol says that their work is transformative. Get this. So if you see these two images, this is, I'll just act it out briefly here and we'll publish these pictures on our site. So his head, I should be descriptive for audio purposes. In the photo, his head is kind of cocked to the side a little bit. And in the Warhol print, he's more up and down as you would be.
Right.
Warhol folks say, look, and his is a silk screen like Warhol did, Warhol says, look, in that photograph, you could see Prince as a vulnerable artist, as a human. That was the intent of that photo. When Andy did it, he silk screened it. He made it just a one-dimensional flat image. In the Warhol one, he's more upright and not, So they're saying their work, the Warhol one, was transformative because there's a different intent, a different commentary, a different take on Prince.
I have a real love-hate relationship with copyright law. I mean, as a content creator, as we all are, you want protected what you create.
Sure.
But you also want what you protected to be seen and to influence people. Financial gain is one reason why you can create. But recognition and exposure and people getting in front of the stuff you create is part of it too. And I mean, Warhol definitely transformed that image. I looked at the pictures and it's obvious that it came from the original, but he did his own spin on it. And plus he did the mosaic with, Marilyn Monroe or Campbell soup cans or whatever he does. He's transformed it. He's taken the original picture and inserted it into a larger piece. Now, I can see the takeaway is that for the cover, they used just one of those little frames. But at that point, it's really fair use of Warhol's fair use of the thing. I don't think the original artist has that much to say because you're pulling an interpretation from another interpretation. And it's just going to look, everybody can call claim to something if they work hard enough, but at some point it's art. And unless you are overtly and blatantly stealing food from the mouth of the artist or claiming it was your original work, I think there's got to be, that's why it's a fuzzy line. Yeah, because they had to be judged. Like you said, Will, it depends. In this case, I think a little touchy. I think it's the original photographer created something great. The fact that we're talking about it, people know that she did it. Yeah. At this point, it's 5 versions down from the original, I think.
I think it's so interesting that this is coming up as an issue around Prince as the subject, because wasn't he notoriously very protective of his work? And
Right. Professor Green had told us about that too. Mm-hmm. He was very litigious, and he didn't want anybody sampling him. Right. Or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, John, the folks have criticized. So your position is like Warhol's, but the opposite, or the counter argument that the photographer is making, and some other folks in support of her are making, that it's a slippery slope, because if all you have to say is, look, mine is a different take, but the image otherwise is kind of, like you said, you could recognize the photo in there.
Right.
Where does it end? And one attorney pointed out that could it be then and the reason why it's so subjective to say my interpretation is different. And if all I have to do is say, well, I have a different interpretation. Right. Maybe it could, for other people's analysis, could be, it looks identical to me, but I could say, no, it's not though.
No,
and they said,
damn it, it's a slippery slope both directions, right? It's a slippery slope to say, oh, too much fair use and I've lost control of my property. But you slide the other direction and you stifle creativity. Can no one be inspired by something else and use a piece of it? Yeah, it's that's why I have such a love-hate relationship with all of copyright and fair use. One of my best friends from high school days is a patent and copyright attorney. Oh, wow. And he winces every time he sees a thumbnail create, or I borrow a font from something, or I have an image. He's like, people are going to drag you through the mud and take you to court. I've not been sued yet because, first, I ain't got much money to take. Secondarily, I think most copyright holders recognize that that's exposure. Here's a content creator that's putting out something, recognizing us. And plus, I cover a lot of retro stuff because a lot of those people are dead probably, but who knows? Yeah. Anyway.
You know, John, here you can sound smart to him now. Just say it's transformative.
That's what I say.
That's right.
But one extreme could be, again, against what you're saying, John, is that in this example, in this piece that I read, was that could a Hollywood studio adapt a book and have a different take on the book, and they don't have to pay the author, credit the author, or anything? Is that, what happens if the court rules in favor of Warhol? John, the other thing, though, is interesting to me is, so this raised a question for me is, well, how did Warhol get away with Campbell's soup and Marilyn Monroe? Yeah. And was it Brillo pads? He did all these different things. And
Coke bottles. I had that.
Digging into it is, it turns out that Campbell's loved what he did, so they never sued him. In fact, at the time,
so the difference is if the offended party enjoys your work. Is that
well, that's part of it. Yeah, like you said.
Again, subjective.
Well, subjective for them though, for the owner of the copyright.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. Hey, that's plenty of everything. That was 1980s news. Hurry, get it out. Let's play the music. Hey, our independent podcast is brought to you every week by folks just like you. So if you'd like to help us out, please follow us on the podcast platform you're listening to right now. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share an episode on Facebook. All of these actions just take a moment and are 100% free. But if you'd like to chuck in a buck and help us keep publishing the show week after week, please visit us at 1980snow.com/support to find out how you can send us $1 or $2. And thank you so much. It means a lot. Okay, so in just a few moments, I'm really excited again. We're going to speak with Paul Robb, singer, songwriter, producer. He helped create the sound of Information Society, one of my favorite groups from the 1980s. All right, hey, before that, though, we got to give away our Ralph Macchio book here. So, so we got everybody's comments, everybody's names, everybody that entered a comment on social media. I got loaded up into this thing that's randomly going to pick somebody and let it do its thing. And the winner is John Acquavita.
Nice. Congratulations, John.
We'll reach out to find the best way to get Ralph Macchio's new book, Waxing On the Karate Kid and Me, sent out to you. And for those of you who didn't win, thanks for participating. You can still get your hands on a copy of the book. It's available everywhere books are sold. And we encourage you to check out bookshop.org to order your copy. I was thinking, okay, so first off, you guys may not be as familiar with Information Society as I am.
I get that. I'm not. Yeah.
And the reason why is because, look, I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, right outside of, New York. I was a DJ throughout the 1980s. As I told you before, getting music to be a DJ, even as young as I was older friends that went to clubs and found out this was hot. And my one friend would just go to the DJ. What is this? What's hot? And he'd find out, Or we'd go to record stores, in New York or, in other cities around us in New Jersey, and just ask the person there, who's usually a DJ too. And they had turntables, and they'd say, it's this, and they'd put it down. Ooh. And then we'd get what they wanted. So one of those records, it turns out, was Running, a record that Information Society had recorded independently. And I think they didn't even know this at the time because they were from Minneapolis. It became a huge club hit. So they weren't aware that the single for this record was being,
Wait, they didn't know?
No, they didn't realize at first.
Well, pre-internet, right? It's not like you have club charts, right? You have radio charts. And so if you're hitting the club and, in some backwater area like New Jersey, then how are you going to hear about it?
Them fighting words.
South Jersey.
Got him.
Central/South Jersey. Yes, I agree.
Oh.
Not Northeast.
Refer back to our previous episode with
Jim.
With Jim of the Smithereens.
So yeah, and I think as the story goes, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk to Paul about this, but ultimately they get contacted by a club owner, promoter that says, "Could you come perform your music here?" Like, why?
They're like,
what are you talking about?
That's so great.
You know who our band is, right? Pleasantly surprised, I'm sure.
Yeah. Anyway, later on they record this independently. Later on, it gets picked up by Tommy Boy, who remixes it, just the single. At the time, Tommy Boy's an imprint of Warner Brothers. I don't think they are anymore.
Okay.
It became even more of a hit and eventually reached number 2 on the dance club charts. And Tommy Boy, by the way, had a lot of, iconic 1980s music, Africa Bambaataa, So Sonic Force, That's a Sonic, a lot of hip hop and a lot of electro hip hop, Digital Underground, De La Soul.
Yeah, De La Soul. Yeah. I remember us talking about that. Yeah.
Anyway, so eventually Tommy Boy signs them to a record deal. In 1986. And in 1988, their self-titled album explodes onto the charts on the strength of its lead single, What's on Your Mind? I want to know. I'm going to sing it.
Is that the
one? Get on YouTube. Yeah.
I forgot to research.
Something you can't. Yes.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
So YouTube won't mute it. But
we're not singing accurately enough that YouTube is going to catch that. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
It's fair use, but YouTube does not care.
Oh, yeah. The way I'm singing it is transformative. YouTube, listen up.
Transforming it into garbage.
It's correct. That's accurate.
The parenthetical for the song, What's on Your Mind, is Pure Energy.
All right.
Pure Energy.
Wow, John knows the song.
I know my Information Society.
I'm impressed too.
Okay, well, so then maybe I don't even have to tell the rest of this, but
keep doing it.
When they originally made the record, their demo version of it before Tommy Boy got involved, it was very different than the song you heard on the radio. And it was, as they talk about it, was a little rougher, it was a little more simpler, it sounded very indie. Warner Brothers says, hey, Warner Brothers / Tommy Boy says, hey, we got to get you like a real producer. Come out of Minneapolis, come to New York City, and we'll hook you up with someone. They hooked them up with Fred Marr, who was a guy who did Scritti Politti, who had worked with Kraftwerk. And so when they get together now to really craft this song, it eventually, becomes the hit that we know. But one of the things that really, again, what?
I know where you're going.
You do?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I know where you're going.
Remember now. Now you get it.
No, I don't think I remember, but I know where you're going. Go for it.
Okay. One of the things that they did, though, to give it the iconic sound that it ultimately had was rely on something that the lead singer, Kurt Larson, had prepared for years earlier. Because in the mid 1980s, he had been recording audio from television shows from his TV straight to his cassette deck.
Yep.
Okay.
And he knew one day he'd use it for something, for music, but he wasn't sure. So when they got a sampler, he started loading these sounds in. But again, they hadn't have a place for them. So when they're working on refining What's on Your Mind and finishing their first, eponymous album, he suddenly remembers, I've got these, snippets of these different shows, including several from his favorite TV show, Star Trek. Yes.
So fortunately, neither Desilu nor Leonard Nimoy was upset about the fair use of pure energy.
That's a perfect story. Okay, let me play you the clip of. So I just put together a little mix of just the samples.
Yep.
I'm really glad this isn't a game.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, could John identify quotes from Star Trek, the original series? No, yes. John, I was never going down that path. Okay. That would be.
It depends. Like, what do you want to know? The actor or the episode? It's like, depends.
Oh,
okay.
How deep is the cut? Right. What color tunic was he wearing when he said this?
All right. So this is just a little snippet of a few of the samples they use from two of their songs, including What's on Your Mind and Walking Away.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet. Pure energy.
So just in that small clip, you've got snippets from Leonard Nimoy's Spock. You've got William Shatner as Kirk, DeForest Kelly as McCoy.
Yep.
And
did I hear Nomad in there? Did I hear Nomad? I thought it did.
No, not in that.
Okay.
No.
All right.
There is a song where that's from what, Changeling?
Yep, exactly.
Nomad and Changeling? They actually do sample Nomad in a different song.
Destroy.
But they do, they do modify the voices a little bit, so it does sound a little bit unlike the actual actors.
Okay.
But also Scotty's in there. James Doohan's in there too as well. So the song eventually reaches number 1 and on the Dance Music Club Play charts and number 3 on the U.S. Hot 100. But the band doesn't stop with just using it in the two songs I played. They also included samples in songs throughout that, I guess, again, their first album with Warner Brothers, Over the Sea, Something in the Air. These other songs include clips from these episodes, which are among them Mirror Mirror, Wolf in the Fold, Changeling. What else? I Mud is in there.
Right.
And since then, on other albums since, they've used Star Trek in a number of different records as well.
Cool.
But and so I do have here is just small clips of where those original audios came from the various shows here that I mentioned.
Fascinating. Pure energy. Pure thought. Totally incorporeal.
A trigger relay is now in operation. Any attempts to alter course will result in the immediate destruction of this vessel.
I have the leader of the Hulkan Council waiting on Channel B.
It is useless to resist us.
Shatner?
We do not resist you.
Mr. Spock.
I know a cafe where the women are so...
I know the place, Jim.
Let's go see. You gentlemen, in your condition, don't be ridiculous.
That's a fun episode. Scotty's super excited about going to that Pleasure Planet.
Yes.
Some R&R. Let's go see. With regard to how they could do this, you're right, John. Look, this ties directly to what we were talking about. So this is the era of the late 1980s where it's still the Wild West as far as copyright go. Folks aren't sure what they can and cannot do. Yeah. We're still going to have Paul's Boutique in 89. Yeah. You're still going to have the Cactus album from Third Base. Records that sampled and maybe didn't actually get the licenses or pay for them. Songs that couldn't be made today. But in 1988, because folks were starting to get wind of this idea that maybe we can't just use whatever we want. One of the execs at Warner Brothers hears their music that this album is creating and is like, holy shit, wait a second. You've got Paramount IP all over this album.
Yeah.
We have to get them to give us permission. Let's offer them some money and get clearance. And for according to Kurt, the album languishes for about 9 months as a result of this.
Wow.
It goes nowhere. Okay. They don't know what to do. So what happens ultimately is just by bizarre, happenstance, or maybe exactly how it was supposed to be. Their rep at Warner Brothers, Kevin Laffey, was friends with Adam Nimoy.
Leonard's
the son of Leonard Nimoy.
Oh my goodness.
Who happened at the time was a music business lawyer in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So the rep calls up Adam and says, can you help? Can you talk to your dad? Does he have pull at the company, at Paramount?
Wow.
And Adam, who at the time was according to Kurt, was having a difficult relationship with his father, still reached out to him anyway and said, can you help me with this? And he just explained what I need you to, he said, this is what I need you to say. Here's the music. Here's the clips we need. They'll give you money. There's nothing else to do. And Leonard took it to Paramount and asked them, and they cleared it.
Wow.
And so that's how the album was cleared to come out.
How about that?
What's interesting is Kurt in the band, and this has been like InSoc mythology for years. You've heard this story, never knowing it was true. It turns out that the band didn't know if it was true either. They thought maybe someone was exaggerating to make it sound, sort of, more grandiose than it was.
More interesting. Right. Then I got to hear it, right? Because there's a backstory, but there really was.
As Kurt explains it, 15 years later, he's lucky enough to meet Leonard Nimoy in San Francisco because he's there promoting his photography book. Kurt says he gets to talk to him for about a half an hour because, surprisingly, as Kurt puts it, there's no one else there. And he says, "Hey, I've got to know. Is it true?
What you're thinking?
I've been
told what's on your mind.
I've got to know what you're thinking.
I've been told this story that you did this thing for our album, and I'm wondering if it's true." And he said Leonard thought about it for a minute and said, "Oh, yes, I do recall that. Adam brought that to me. Did the album ever come out?"
Big fan. Big fan.
So, look, hey, I don't know that he's in their demo necessarily, but, ultimately the album does come out, spawns a number of hits, and has been certified gold.
Nice.
All right. Hey, with all of that, we'll be back in just a moment when we're joined by our guest, Paul Robb. Our guest today is the singer, songwriter, and composer who, in 1982, along with Kurt Larson and James Cassidy, founded the influential synth-pop group Information Society. In 1988, their band's self-titled album raced up the U.S. Billboard 200, where it peaked at number 25 and was certified gold. But even before their ubiquitous hits, including What's on Your Mind and Walking Away, filled the airwaves, their unique combination of electronic music and vocals had already begun to define the sound of dance music that ultimately dominated the clubs. In 2021, our guest and his bandmates released a new album, Oddfellows, which sounds both as contemporary as any dance music today and reminiscent of the sound they helped popularize in the 1980s. Hey, please welcome to the show, Paul Robb.
Happy to be here.
I am thrilled to speak with you. I've long wanted to speak with you probably since I started doing this show, and because I'm a fan, and I'm a genuine fan back from the 1980s for a number of reasons. One, because I was into electronic music, because I was an aspiring composer, and I had my little Casio keyboard, and because I was a DJ throughout the 1980s too. As a young person in the earlier 1980s, I was really ambitious, and I think at 12 or 11 years old, I started DJing, and so when your music started to break, I was already, playing it at parties and dances and clubs. So thank you so much for joining us. I've heard you talk about some of your early influences, and quite honestly, I don't know what's the word for discriminating against people who are not from the East Coast. I don't know if there's an ism for that or an ist for that, but thinking about all the great bands that came out of Minneapolis, you cite instead these European groups like Kraftwerk and Daniel the Normal and Fad Gadget. And my first thought was, how does someone in Minnesota even find out about those groups?
Well, it's a good question, and there is a certain type of person who I should back up and say that back in the day, when we were young and influenced and spun, cultural sponges, we didn't want to have anything to do with what surrounded us in the milieu that we grew up in. We wanted to be different from that, and we wanted to hear different things from that. And, luckily in the 80s, and this was a residue from the 70s, I guess, maybe even the late 60s, but there were a whole network of independent record stores.
Sure.
And these record stores made it their business to import a lot of weird stuff from Europe and sometimes Asia, but mostly from Europe. And that was why you would go to these stores. And, I remember the first time I was exposed to DAF, which was another one of our big early influences. I was just flipping through the 12 inches, and I said to the clerk, what is this? And he said, it sounds a lot like, that fascist groove thing, which was funny for two reasons. Number one, and I was like, oh, cool. So number
fascism,
one,
cool.
I didn't know what that fascist groove thing was. It was an anti-fascist song by Heaven 17. And then secondly, DAF was probably one of those first sort of industrial bands in Europe that kind of parodied fascism in their imagery and their sound and their presentation. But in those days, we talk about curation being the valuable commodity these days, as opposed to creation, because there's so much material out there. You need someone to curate it for you. But back in the day, curation was just as important. It's just that it was different people doing it. And when I was a young lad, the curators were two groups of people: the DJs at the club and the clerks at the record stores.
Right. Yeah.
And what filtered to us wasn't strictly European, like Soul Sonic Force and the B-52s and the Residents and Devo. Those were all American bands and very American in their approach to things. But what they shared with the European influences that we had is that they were not Journey. And they were not REO Speedwagon or AC/DC. They were something new. And we ate it all up. We ingested it all.
Right. That's interesting. I'm trying to think, like when I was in college in the later 80s, thinking about what was our, how did we rebel? It wasn't.
Well, it was grunge. It was what came to be called alternative, which to us seemed like just sort of a rerun of corporate rock, but with different clothing attached to it.
Yeah, and instead of recording in garages, now they were actually in studios. So things even sounded better. And more
it was like arena garage rock.
Yeah. So, when you first start creating this music and you've got some of these styles and other artists that you want to emulate, how is it that you're able to do it? I think now how democratized music production is, for free, you could get something on your iPad, but then you needed components and synthesizers and real physical gear. And at the time, it's pretty expensive.
It was expensive and it was extremely hard to work with. And it was always exploding in various ways.
Sometimes literally, you mean?
Well, I mean, we had, I can remember one period where we were, this was long pre-MIDI. MIDI didn't exist, MIDI being a way for synthesizers to communicate to each other. But you could still do certain things where you could link the drum machines and the synthesizers together. And we had a particular synth called the Moog Source. And it had a connection that allowed it to send clock information to control the tempo.
Sure.
And, so you could play sequences together with a drum machine. But every so often, like every fourth or fifth time, it would send out a tempo that was something like 10,000 times faster than the actual tempo you were trying to set. And, that happened to us many times on stage. We had to retune our synths mostly between every single song. We used sequencers where you manually entered on buttons what the sequence was going to be. We had to, and they didn't have memory, so it could hold one sequence. And if you wanted a different sequence, you had to enter it. And we had to do those things between songs. And so, our early performances were mayhem, but in a good way. I've often said that we, in our early years, we were a punk band. Despite the fact that we didn't wear flannel shirts and we didn't play guitars, but in every other functional way that defined the punk movement, we really fit in. We were all about DIY, and we were all about sort of, looking down on technique. We just felt like we didn't need to know how to play instruments. That wasn't the crux of emotion and music. And we were all about confronting the audience and breaking the fourth wall and all those things. And so the mayhem that happened as a result of technical limitations was just all part of the the aesthetic.
Wow. I never would have thought about that way. And folks couldn't have appreciated how organic your performances were at that point.
Well, some people did. It was what was the term from Spinal Tap? Our appeal was more selective.
So at that point, though, you're working with this gear. What is your musical training at that point? Is it just doing your 10,000 hours and absorbing these records and stuff you like? Or
pretty much. I mean, we all had musical backgrounds, but they were just a mishmash. I played saxophone in high school band, and my background was mostly jazz music and funk music. James Cassidy, our bass player, was a veteran of a number of heavy metal bands. He played in a Kiss cover band and a Black Sabbath cover band. And Kurt was just a choir boy, literally a choir boy. And so, that's what we brought to the project, collectively.
It reminds me of a little bit of the, sort of the diversity of Duran Duran in that sense, that magic of, was it Nick Rhodes that knew all the technology, and you've got, Andy had the rock edge, and just a fusion of those different talents that created something different and other than their different sources.
Well, and speaking of influences, I can remember in the summer of 1984, I had a job working in a parking lot, and I was sitting in the tin shack, and it was about 110 degrees all summer. And Duran Duran had several hits that year. I'm not sure what they were, but Hungry Like the Wolf or whatever.
It was probably Rio, the album Rio. Yeah.
Rio, yeah. And I just kind of absorbed their, just studied their vocal harmonies. I didn't necessarily get excited by their instrumentation because I felt like it was a little bit too sort of mainstream for us. But I did like their vocal harmonies and their ability to write a hook.
Right.
And so that was me sitting in a tin shack in the middle of a asphalt parking lot, listening to Duran Duran to get some tips about vocal harmonies.
It's interesting because, similarly, also, it's, the lyrics that you ultimately develop for the songs are, I want to say, they didn't seem contrived or commercial in the sense that was popular a lot at the time, much like Duran Duran, where it was more from the heart in poetry than,
Yeah. Well, this is something it's difficult to explain to people who didn't live through punk and new wave, particularly new wave. But, and also it's difficult for people to believe about us who only know us because of our pop music. But back in those days, our goal, along with our idols, was to write songs that weren't about anything in particular. The idea was to write lyrics that had as little content as possible. I mean, I was listening to Grace Jones and to, like Daniel Miller type acts from Mute and all this very early, it was before there was, anything called techno or synth pop. They,
Sure.
People tried to use the term machine rock. And the idea was the music was thought to be inhuman, and the lyrics were the aspiration for the lyrics was to be about as little as possible.
Wow.
I think that's why there was a movie that was a terrible movie, a god-awful movie that cannot be rewatched. And I don't recommend anybody watch it, but there was a movie in its aesthetics that was so incredibly influential called Liquid Sky.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, if you're an aficionado, you need to watch Liquid Sky.
Sure.
But there's a song in that movie called Me and My Rhythm Box. And it to me, it epitomizes what we were going for in the early years of the band, which was this kind of robotic, beyond Kraftwerk. It was like Kraftwerk with throw in some sexual fetishes and some psychological problems, and that's what we were aiming for in the early years.
Yeah. Certainly, it becomes something different. But before we get there, the story of running in particular reminds me of that. I want to say it's like a tale that's in some managerial book that you get. If you're going to manage an office, tell your employees this thing about stopping 6 feet short of gold. The idea that, you didn't realize what you were just about to score big and you stopped. Right before running blows up in the clubs, the band has disbanded.
Yeah, that's true. As a matter of fact, it happened before running. When I initially recorded running, the band had already broken up. James had gone off to Seattle to find himself, and Kurt had gone off to Vienna, Austria to find himself. And I tried to kind of recreate or resurrect the band with some new people. And one of those new people was Murat Konar, who was a software engineer, right, but wanted to also be in a band at nights. And, and his brother, we kind of first his brother Mitat was in the band. And then when Mitat didn't work out, and I called Murat and asked him if he wanted to be our singer. And he brought the song Running with him. And I remembered somebody's advice to me about production. He was listening to some of my demos and someone said, I've always read that it's best to put the kick drum and the bass line together.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So they hit together. And that was, news to me. I didn't have any kind of principle like that, but that's what I chose to do when I was starting to produce Running and create that sound that Running creates. And I must say that it worked.
Iconic. Yes.
And then when Running broke, when it started getting popular, suddenly all the rats came back to the...
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Yeah.
So is it that you had tried long enough and you thought, what are we really doing with this? I got to get a real job. But then, there's potential for this dream. Let's get back together.
Yeah. Well, and what happened was that it was the transformation of from InSoc, the local art, confrontational Dada electronic music project, right, to Information Society, the potential pop band. And it was, that dynamic or the dissonance between those two things, in the project lasts up until this day. Right. Kurt Larson, our singer, would still, aside from all the things that he's gained from being in the band, aesthetically, he would still rather be the local artsy, confrontational, avant-garde electronic act.
It's interesting you tell that story about when the band split up and Murat's a software engineer. And I remember this, I don't remember where I got this from, a magazine or some kind of folklore surrounding the band. And it probably wasn't a story that came out till, I want to say your first, album with Tommy Boy. Mm-hmm. But that this band is all nerds and computer geeks and they have office jobs. And I remember me and my friends feeling like they're us. Like this is the first representation of us in music. We're not rockers. We're not punk rockers. We're never going to do that, but we can program a synth. And maybe that was part of the origins of that story because, again, that's something that stayed with me for, 40 years now or 35 years.
It's absolutely true. And I mean, that's kind of ties in with what I was saying about, the punk aesthetic. It's like, there are multiple ways to rock out and they don't always involve long hair and a 6 strings on a guitar fretboard, and that's what Kraftwerk taught us all. They're the godfathers of us all. Right. And that's, I remember the first time, literally a revolution in my thinking. I saw the first time I saw a Kraftwerk album was when I was in 10th grade. And it was The Man Machine. It was the famous picture of them in their red shirts with the lipstick and everything.
Right.
And I was listening to jazz and, like prog rock at that point. And I remember looking at that album cover saying, what the fuck is that? Look at those freaks. Yeah. And by the next summer, when their next record came out,
Trans Europe,
it was like, I was their number one fan. It was like, they were my holy grail.
Yes.
And so, between them and Gary Newman, that's kind of what sold me on electronic music as a viable path.
It's interesting that I interviewed Sir Mix-a-Lot, I don't know, several months ago at this point. And the two groups he cited as his major influences were Kraftwerk and Gary Newman. And he said everything but Cars. He said, take Cars out, everything else, the dark, more synthy stuff. I think that might say everything you need to know about 80s music, that, an iconic hip hop group and an iconic, pop group could have the same origins.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's no coincidence. And that was the magic of the 80s. Well, after we all moved to New York, everybody who lives in New York thinks that their time in New York was the golden age. I remember when we moved there, everyone was like, "Oh, you should have been here back in the, whenever." But the clubs that we went to and the shows that we went to were completely free form in terms of what kind of acts were playing there, what kind of music that they played. There was no delineation between hip hop and electro pop and synth pop and Latin music. Right. And it was all one and the same. Yeah. And, we played many, many shows with hip hop acts, and we influenced and were influenced by a lot of New York based hip hop acts. Obviously if you know anything about the history of Tommy Boy Records, you know that Planet Rock was their, that's what put them on the map.
Sure.
And Bambaataa basically ripped off Numbers by Kraftwerk. And for Running, we basically ripped off Bambaataa and sang over it instead of rapped over it.
Yeah.
And, I can't tell you how many famous rappers have come up to us at, oldies shows or whatever and say, "Oh, you were a huge influence on me back in the day." Wow. Like we were in Texas a couple of years ago, and Fat Joe, remember Fat Joe from the O's? I mean, he's still, like a cultural icon at this point. And he was like, Running was my jam, back in the day. And I can't tell you how important that song was to me. And we've heard that many, many times. And culturally, we don't have anything to do with them. But, when it comes to the dance floor or being in the clubs, we were all on the same page at that time.
Yeah. And a lot of the, noticing some of the sounds, even listening, and people should know, I think your entire catalog is available on your Bandcamp site now, it seems like.
Well, except for the 3 Warner Brothers albums.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, there you go. Well, yeah, and folks can find them. But my point being that some of the older stuff, if you listen to, like going all the way back to Creatures of Influence, some of the techniques you use on there are, techniques that are then become common later in the decade in freestyle music and hip hop music. Yep. And it's pretty cool to hear that, those connections.
Well, and going back to your question about, how were we, how did we even get these ideas? It was, we weren't, our involvement in freestyle was not organic. We didn't grow up in the Bronx. We weren't Puerto Rican, but we were exposed to those records.
Right.
And, because of the brilliance of the buyers from the independent record stores that we went to in Minneapolis.
Right. And it is interesting, you're talking about Running. And then obviously that's what gets you your single with Tommy Boy, which leads to your record deal with Tommy Boy, which again is part of Warner Brothers at that time. So many of the dance songs that in that era, and some of them on Tommy Boy, like TKA, but Noel, Trenier, again, they're singing about the heartbreak of romance, which is really curious to me because so much of the songs on the radio at the time are about, how great it is to be in love, Whitney Houston, and so on and so forth. You go to the club and it's like, I caught you cheating on me.
Yeah. Well, someone once described most of our best songs as feeling good about feeling bad.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's a viable strain of popular music.
Yeah. So when you get your record deal with Warner Brothers, and my understanding is, look, you had been used to producing your records, back home in Minneapolis. Warner Brothers says, "Hey, you guys need a producer. Get your asses over here to New York City. We're going to hook you up with somebody." They hook you up with Fred Marr, who, I don't know, a year earlier or around that time, produced, I don't know, it's like Kraftwerk's 9th album.
Well, he was brought in. One of the things that sold us on him was that he was involved in Electric Cafe.
Right.
Did not produce it, but he was he helped with their programming and their drum programming. He was a technical boffin, but also he was just a ferocious musician. He played with Scritti Politti, and before that, he was with a group called Material in New York, which was one of those downtown groups that was nobody knows about anymore, but they were hugely influential. Bill Laswell and Fred and Robert Quine. And so he brought that kind of downtown legitimacy with him. And we hit it off. He's one of the unsung heroes of that first album. We never would have been able to make anything like that without our collaboration with Fred. He brought a professionalism that we completely lacked. And then, our mix engineer, Roy Shamir, brought a whole other level of sort of street cred to the mixes. People like Little Louie Vega, brought even more cred to the process in terms of remixes. So it was definitely not an immaculate conception. We relied and benefited from the skills of a lot of people on that record.
So Information Society, your first album comes out. It's huge. I mean, it goes gold pretty quickly within just a few months, I guess largely bolstered by What's on Your Mind, which is number 1 on the US Dance Music Club Play chart and number 3 on Billboard. Are you guys just over the moon suddenly that most folks don't appreciate the amount of hours you've spent getting to that point. Right. So for me, it's easy to say, one day you were, still toiling away and the next day you're big stars. But is it just, I guess, sort of a mind-blowing or surreal experience to suddenly be ubiquitous?
I mean, it's kind of the classic rock and roll story, but you're right. That overnight success came after 5 years of toiling in the salt mines.
Yeah.
It did go gold very quickly, but it would have gone platinum if the record company had pressed more albums. That was our complaint at the time. So we would go to in-store appearances and there would be a line around the block of people who wanted to, take their picture with us and get a signed album. And there were no albums in the store.
Boy. Wow.
So that was, kind of the story of our career. Actually, we coined this term info luck. Like everything like bad that can go wrong definitely happened to us. But yeah, it was a level of success that we were not at all accustomed to. And also we were so headstrong that it was very difficult to manage us. We wouldn't let anyone style us, in terms of hair and clothing. So if you look at those early videos, we're wearing only what we wanted to wear. And they would bring in choreographers and stylists and stuff. We were just such little prima donnas about it all. But you need that confidence to get to that point in the first place. And I think that, for us, it was like a roller coaster ride, and you can enjoy it or you can not enjoy it, as the case may be. But to have a really long-term career, you need to learn how to take control of that roller coaster and steer it for yourself. Right. And that's something that we did not learn to do.
I would have guessed the thing about the styling, because you had such a particular look. I would have guessed that somebody worked with you. Obviously, you had directors and producers when you did the music videos, which helped define what you guys looked like. But you each had such an individual seeming style already. I would have thought somebody sat you down and came up with these characters.
Not at all. Not at all. And the funny thing is, we just it was just nonstop fighting among the band members. Sometimes we would do a photo shoot and we would let the people, they would bring in the wardrobe and we would choose what we wanted, and they would do our hair and stuff like that. But if you look at that first video for What's on Your Mind, that we wore basically just what we were already wearing, on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And it would kind of go back and forth, but yeah, we were extremely stubborn and parochial about those about those kind of things, which, it's great because we never sold out. We never became wishy-washy and, but it kind of, I think, limited the upside potential of the group.
Then where did the Faux-Raptor, is that what you call them? The Faux-Raptor glasses you had? Those?
On Hack. That's a perfect example. I was walking by the window. I lived on 21st Street, New York, in Stuyvesant Town, and I was walking down 3rd Avenue, and I saw an optometrist shop, and they had a pair of those in the window. And this is how cocky I was. I just went in there and said, I want to buy those. And the guy was like, okay, $500 or whatever. Yeah. And that's where they came from.
Wow.
I think I still have those. Yeah.
I was so envious. I wanted those. And I thought for sure, I only recently learned that, they actually sell them as glasses for whatever purposes. I don't know why at home you'd need to do that or walking around.
It totally wouldn't.
But,
no.
But they still sell them. Now they sell them. You can get them on Amazon, but.
Probably. And I had custom lenses ground for that.
Okay.
Mirror lenses. And, those were the early version of the machine where they click in the different lenses to get your prescription.
So part of what we talk about on our show is how influential the 1980s and synthwave, let's say as that category. I don't know that I'd say information society is synthwave. Information society is really sort of, exceeds the bounds of any particular genre because it's sort of a Venn diagram of so many different things. It's sound. Yeah. But synthwave itself seems to be as popular now, at least, the things that I follow. Kids today are writing music that was popular back in the 1980s.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and when I think about trends in pop music, I think that what you don't think about is the two most important factors behind the scenes are the business side of the music business, and B, the technological developments. And there's not a single musical genre from the past 50 years that you can name to me where I can't tell you what technological development led to it or what it was a backlash against.
Right.
And similarly, in terms of the business side of the music business, not necessarily the 80s, but I'd say up until the mid 90s was the last time that, major labels owned the music business and still had this business model of signing an act and working with them over time to develop as artists.
Right.
And that model, and I think that's one of the reasons the 80s still lives in, iconographically in people's minds as the last hurrah of memorable pop music acts, because weirdos were given the resources to develop their weird visions. And after that, things splintered to the point where there were so many microgenres and there was a whole raft of indie scenes, but in terms of national exposure, it was like do or die. You had one shot, and if you didn't make it with that shot, you were out of there.
Yeah. And
that wasn't the way it was in the 70s and the 80s and the early part of the 90s. I think that's one of the reasons that those years are still thought of as kind of the peak of like if you're a rocker, the 70s, nothing beats the 70s.
Right.
And it was the peak of album oriented rock music. And, for everyone after that, the 80s kind of shines as the time when all the freaks and weirdos were able to step up and do what they wanted to do. And then in my opinion, it was the 90s when everything started to go into the blender and just get chopped up and regurgitated and hyper exposed over very, ever shorter timelines.
I'm reminded of your comment you made earlier about how the record stores and the DJs were the curators of music back then. And sometimes they were the same person. I know the record store I went to was like the DJ at a club, so he could certainly tell you what to, but in thinking about the music today, we don't, and your point about how things have evolved since the 80s, we don't have that curation. So, and look, I'm saying this, I'm a cynical middle-aged person. Because we have technology has democratized music production and we don't have gatekeepers, there's a lot of garbage out there and I don't have time to sift through it.
Right. And we have nobody to tell us, what we should listen to. We have nobody like that guy in the record store that I was talking about saying, try this one. If you like Heaven 17, you'll like DAF.
Yeah.
And, the algorithms try to do that, but they're pretty terrible at it.
Yeah.
And the whole TikTokization of the music world has, as I say in my metaphor, has just ground up all trends into these, it's atomized the concept of trends. There's no trends in music anymore. And if there are, they only last a month and then it's over,
Right.
And so there's nothing can be cool.
Yeah.
There's nothing that the whole essence of cool was like, oh, I just found this new thing that nobody else knows about. And that is a dynamic that does not exist anymore.
Wow. Right. You're right. You're right. And I still see young people like I have two children. One's an adult and one's younger. They do want that. They want to be the one that's found something new.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, with young folk of today, they'll find something like The Band or Led Zeppelin. And to them, it's brand new. Yes. And their musical taste has no boundaries. They'll have they'll do a playlist, and it'll have like Kanye and then Taylor Swift and then Robbie Robertson and then, Patsy Cline and then, whatever, Wu-Tang. Yeah. And they don't know or care what scenes any of those people came out of, or what scenes or trends that they represent. They just and that's liberating in a certain sense, but also a little bit depressing.
Yeah, and I blame their parents, because my parents raised me on good music.
I'm afraid to say that's us, though.
Well, my kids have a diverse taste, and most people are not going to catch them off guard with. You ever heard of? Yeah, I saw a video the other day where a guy, some young 30-year-old guy, was he's an accomplished musician and he's got his keyboard. He said, "Hey, I'm going to do an acoustic version of this song I just discovered by this group called The Squeeze. His song is called Tempted. It came out in 1981. I don't know, maybe even." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
No, nobody's ever heard of this song.
Get off. Yeah.
I mean, it's like one of my sayings is that cool is a function of scarcity. And like back in the day in Minneapolis, there were only a couple of record stores that you could go to hear this cool music from overseas or from San Francisco or from New York.
Yeah.
And now you don't need to leave your bedroom to hear the most obscure things from Uzbekistan or from South Korea,
Yeah. So briefly, because I know we've been talking for a while so far, but I'm going to curate something for folks right now and recommend Oddfellows, which is the latest Information Society record, which came out in 2021, but I can wholeheartedly recommend it because it's so reminiscent of the music that I love from the late 80s, early 90s. And in that sense, still, talking about what's popular today, it still seems timeless in the sense that, but for it being you that created it, and it was some, newer group, folks wouldn't say, well, that sounds old. It sounds, timeless.
Yeah.
But to what extent was it just old hat for you? Just sort of getting into what, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, I wouldn't imagine it was contrived in the sense you were trying to recapture something from your youth, but I guess I don't know to what extent you've just still got that in your DNA.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And the answer is that because our post-fame career arc has been sort of stretched out, we haven't made records. We have no pressure to make records. Nobody's asking us to make records. We have no record label saying, you got to make a record by next September.
Right.
And we want, I can remember back in the day, management saying, oh, Utah Saints are big on the charts. I want to hear a song that sounds like the Utah Saints or Fat Boy Slim or whatever,
Right.
So we have no expectations and we have no financial need to release music. So therefore, we only release music when we feel inspired to do so. Mm-hmm. And I think that the two of those things combined has allowed us to make records that we don't have any pressure to sound modern, nor do we have any pressure to sound like what we've always sounded like.
Right.
And so as a result of that, we just do what comes naturally to us, in the words of Ringo Starr. And what comes naturally to us is what you hear on Oddfellows. Mm. I remember when we released Synthesizer in 2007, I tried really hard to make that album sound right up to the minute, cutting edge electronic music, which at the time, there was like a LCD sound system and a bunch of sort of resurgent electronic genres.
Right.
And the first thing, like the first 100 reviews of that album were like, oh, this sounds like Classic Information Society. And I realized that we can't do anything other than what we do. And it's a tricky thing. Like if you think about a band like Devo, for instance, they don't really know how to make a Devo record anymore. So the last few records that they've made, they've had to call in like young people, like hotshot programmers and producers, and say like, we don't remember what we did to be Devo, so you have to do that for us. And they've done a pretty good job. Some of their stuff I've liked in recent years, but it is easy to forget, especially as technology changes, what exactly made up a sound or a signature sound for a group. And I think we've avoided that largely just because we haven't released that many records. And when we do, it's only because of love for the music, not because of any other external pressures.
Right. Well, we are grateful for that because, like I said, it's fantastic and so reminiscent of the reason I love your music in the first place.
Well, thank you.
The different synths you use, uses of samples again, some of which are driving me crazy, and you don't have to tell me, Paul, where they came from, but some of them are driving me crazy. Paul, thank you so much for creating the music you did in the 1980s. It's important in the canon of music of that era, but also it's meaningful. It's so meaningful to so many of us who, in the very least, associate many good memories with your songs. And thank you for your time today.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. And it's always a pleasure to talk.
So I've been looking to talk to Paul, reaching out different sources for about a year or more, maybe 2 years now.
Yeah.
So I was really excited to speak with him. So that was a lot of fun.
That's so
and
cool.
now your wish come true, and well worth it. We're worth the wait too.
Yes. Great guy.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the show.
Hey, speaking of our show, it is brought to you every week thanks in part to our early adopters like Kathy Burke, Rick Parker, and Karen Flieger. And thank you especially to our Secret of Our Success level Patreon supporters, John Henderson, Craig Coletta, John Kaminsky, Marcus Taylor, and Tony Great.
Yay.
Yay.
Now it just occurred to me. I'm sure it's not the first time you heard it. Tony Great. Come on.
He's
right?
great.
How did that just occur to me?
A quick shout out, by the way, Tony Great's book just dropped this past week.
Yes.
Tom in the Order of Cosmic Champions. Tony, a great friend of the show, and what a cool book. If you haven't checked it out yet, Will might throw a link in the description of this video or this podcast or something. Great book available at Amazon or wherever you shop for books now. Really nice.
Nice.
Thanks, John. So, look, thank you so much to Tony and everybody else that mentioned there. Yeah, and there's plenty of ways to support the show, and many of them are free. Most of them are free, including just send us an email and tell us you're grateful. Believe me, this kind of thing, just is the way we know that we're onto something here,
Yeah.
And we just got an email from Keith Sheehan.
Okay.
And he wrote an idea for an episode. Because You Belong to the City has been an earworm haunting me for the past 2 days, I thought I'd share my idea for an 80s song-themed episode. 80s sax songs!
Oh, my goodness.
He wrote, the basic premise is songs where a saxophone features prominently. Feel free to completely ignore Kenny G like I do.
Oh.
Wow. Goodness.
Some examples. The Heat Is On. Careless Whisper. Who Can It Be Now? Maneater. I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man. What You Need.
Nice.
Let me know what you think. I love the show. Thanks, Keith, for writing to us. And what I think is it's a great idea. And one talking about trying to get Paul on the show. I've been trying to pull this one off for a while too. A lot of times I get stuck on, I want a certain guest.
Yeah.
We are not experts on certain things, and some things we could just talk about because it's from our experience. I want to get a saxophonist. Yes, I've reached out to Tim Capello. No response. And there's a few others that I won't name because I have had some responses and I'm still working on it.
Oh.
Yep.
So hopefully it'll be a musician who actually played on some of these records.
That would be awesome.
That's what the goal is.
Oh, yeah.
I could probably get a guy that played sax in my high school marching band if that helps out.
Oh, right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm married to a saxophone player. I mean,
Well, there we go.
How quickly the bar dropped. I mean, just
Whoa.
within seconds.
hey, I just want to say, I really love when people comment on the 1980s Now Facebook posts.
Yeah.
With a question or just, some little humorous thing that occurred to them or answering a question. I love when people do that.
That's another free way to show your support, because when you do that, what Facebook says is like, look, people are interested and they get in front of more people. You're getting your thoughts out and it's really helping us.
Yeah. It just makes it more fun too. We
always say that kind of stuff puts the gas in the tank, doesn't it? Just keeps you motivated. Yep.
Right. Okay. Hey, with that, we'll be plenty of gassed up when we talk to you next time on 1980s Now.
Until next time.
Bye-bye, friends.
This podcast is part of the 80s Ruled Network. Visit the 80s Ruled on Facebook for more 1980s awesomeness.